What if the story of God didn't start with Moses or the tablets on Sinai? What if the name Yahweh, the sacred name of the Almighty, was already known, spoken, and worshipped by people long before Israel even existed? This isn't just a forgotten detail. It's a mystery that challenges everything we thought we knew about divine revelation. The truth is, Yahweh's voice echoed through deserts, kingdoms, and hearts far beyond Israel's borders. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. This journey will take us deeper into ancient worship, hidden faith, and the global reach of the one true God. For generations, we've believed that Yahweh, the eternal, unchanging God, revealed himself first to Israel, that he chose one nation, one people, and made himself known through them alone, while the rest of the world remained in spiritual darkness. But the true story runs deeper. Long before Moses stood barefoot at the burning bush, long before the thunder of Sinai and the giving of the law, the name Yahweh was already known. It was whispered in deserts, spoken in ancient prayers, and honored by people who had never heard of Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. Yahweh's presence stretched beyond borders. His voice called out to seekers in foreign lands. He revealed himself to righteous men outside the covenant, men like Job, Melchizedek, and Jethro, proving that he was never confined to one nation. This isn't a new idea. It's an old truth, long forgotten. And once uncovered, it reshapes how we understand God's plan, not just for Israel, but for all of humanity. This is the mystery of Yahweh before Israel, and it's time we remembered it. Moses stood on sacred ground, trembling before a bush that burned but was not consumed. From within the flame came a voice, calm, eternal, unmistakably divine. I am who I am. It was a revelation that would shape the destiny of a nation. But listen closely. That moment wasn't the beginning. Immediately after declaring his identity, God said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel. Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me to you." This changes everything. God didn't introduce a new name. He pointed Moses back to the past, to their ancestors who already knew him by that name. Yahweh wasn't a divine stranger. He was a familiar presence, known by those who came before. This means the name Yahweh didn't first appear on Mount Sinai. It wasn't birthed in fire or thunder. It had already been spoken, perhaps in quiet prayers, sacred stories, or desperate cries to the heavens. Long before the tablets were written, there was a whisper that carried through generations. A name known by men and women of faith who walked with God in a time before Israel, before law, before nationhood. The story of Yahweh didn't begin with Moses. It was only being remembered. To trace the earliest echoes of God's name, we journey back to Genesis chapter 4:26. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. In the original Hebrew, that Lord is Yahweh. This moment takes place during the days of Enoch, the grandson of Adam, only 3 generations after the Garden of Eden. There was no law, no tablets, no chosen nation. Yet even then, people were already calling on Yahweh by name. There were no temples or priests, no covenants or commandments, just the raw, unfiltered cry of early humanity, reaching out to the eternal Creator. This wasn't a ritual. It wasn't religion. It was relationship, rooted in instinct, memory, and perhaps divine revelation passed down from the first man who walked with God. Somehow, the sacred name was known, preserved, spoken aloud by people who still carried the echo of Eden in their blood. This challenges the belief that God only revealed himself in stages through one people group. From the beginning, he was making himself known to anyone with ears to hear and a heart to seek. Long before Abraham, long before Moses, Yahweh was not hidden. He was being called upon by name, by a scattered, broken humanity still reaching for the one who had never stopped reaching for them. Long before the priesthood of Aaron, before the tabernacle, before Israel was even a people, there were already those who served the Most High. Their names are often overlooked, their stories buried in the margins of Scripture, but their presence speaks volumes. One of the most mysterious figures among them is Melchizedek. In Genesis 14, he appears suddenly and without explanation. A king of Salem, later known as Jerusalem, and a priest of El Elyon, God Most High. Abraham, fresh from battle, meets him and receives a blessing. In response, Abraham gives him a tenth of all he owns, a tithe and offering of reverence. This act is significant. Abraham, the one chosen by God to father a nation, honors Melchizedek as his spiritual superior. But who was this man? The Book of Hebrews adds layers to the mystery. Melchizedek is described as without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God. A priest forever. To some, this points to a divine appearance, perhaps a pre-incarnate Christ. To others, he was simply a righteous king, appointed by God outside the lineage we know. But either way, one truth stands tall above the mystery. Melchizedek served Yahweh. He honored the same God Abraham would follow, the same God who would later thunder from Mount Sinai. And he did so without a covenant, without a temple, without the law. His story is a powerful reminder that God was already at work beyond the borders of Israel, that true worship and spiritual authority weren't confined to bloodlines, and that Yahweh, even in the earliest days, was known by those the world might never expect. Jethro, the non-Israelite who worshipped. Right before the commandments thundered down from Sinai, before the tabernacle stood in the wilderness, there was a man in Midian quietly serving the Most High. His name was Jethro, priest, tribal leader, and father-in-law to Moses. And though he wasn't an Israelite, his heart already beat in rhythm with Yahweh. He lived far from Egypt, but he had heard the stories, how the Red Sea split, how Pharaoh's army drowned, how this invisible god of slaves had done what no empire could stop. When Jethro met Moses again after the Exodus, he didn't just offer congratulations. He worshipped. "Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods," he declared with reverence. Then he built an altar, offered sacrifices, and bowed before the same God who had spoken from the burning bush. And the elders of Israel, they didn't keep their distance. They didn't question his background. They sat down and broke bread with him before Yahweh, accepting him not as a foreigner, but as a brother. It's a quiet scene, but a powerful one. While Egypt's temples were full of idols and oppression, there was a man in the mountains of Midian who already knew the truth. A priest who worshipped right, without law, without lineage, but with a heart tuned to the real and living God. Jethro's story reminds us, Yahweh was never confined to one people. He's always belonged to those who seek him. Job, the outsider, with deeper faith than most long before Israel, marched through the wilderness, and long before Moses ever received the law, there lived a man named Job in the distant land of Uz. He wasn't a descendant of Abraham. He had no covenant, no temple, no priesthood to guide him. By all accounts, he was an outsider to everything we typically associate with God's chosen people. He lived in the land of Uz, a place that felt more myth than map. But make no mistake, Job knew Yahweh, not by tradition, not by inheritance, but by encounter. When calamity crashed into his life, when his children died, his wealth vanished, His body broke down. Job didn't shake his fist at heaven. He didn't bow to foreign gods. Instead, he whispered words that have echoed through time. Yahweh gave, and Yahweh has taken away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. Abid 1:21. Later, as he sat in dust and silence, abandoned by comfort, accused by friends, he lifted his voice again, this time with hope burning through his sorrow. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. Job 19:25. How could a man so far from the covenant speak with such clarity, such confidence? Because Job didn't worship Yahweh as a tribal deity or regional god. He knew him as Redeemer, the same way we now know Christ. His faith didn't come from scrolls or ceremonies. It came from knowing the heart of God. And that makes Job one of the greatest spiritual giants the Bible has ever known. An outsider, yes, but one whose faith runs deeper than most. Balaam, the conflicted prophet who heard God's voice. Now this is where the story takes a turn nobody sees coming. Balaam wasn't a prophet from Israel. He wasn't raised in the ways of Yahweh. He was a pagan diviner, a professional spiritual mercenary from Mesopotamia, known for speaking curses over kingdoms and blessings over battles, for the right price. So when the king of Moab saw Israel camped at his border, he panicked, and he sent for Balaam. Hired him, paid him, told him, "Curse these people for me." But Balaam never expected what happened next. Yahweh showed up. Not with thunder, but with a voice, direct, unmistakable, and holy. God spoke to this outsider, this sorcerer, as clearly as he spoke to Moses, and he said, "You shall not curse this people, for they are blessed." What followed is one of the most shocking moments in Scripture. Balaam, standing before the king who paid him to destroy, opens his mouth, and instead of a curse, he prophesies. And not just any prophecy. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Numbers 24:14. A vision of the Messiah, of Jesus, spoken centuries before Bethlehem, and it came from the mouth of a man who didn't even belong to the covenant. Balaam's heart wasn't clean. He was greedy, torn, tempted, and later condemned. But in this moment, he heard God. Truly, powerfully, unmistakably, and that should stop us in our tracks. Because maybe Yahweh's voice doesn't always land where we expect it. Maybe it finds the outsider, the misfit, the one the church wouldn't dare put behind a pulpit. Balaam's story isn't about perfection, it's about access. It's about a God who speaks to whomever he chooses, and a reminder that sometimes the clearest word from heaven comes through the least likely mouth. So what does it all mean? That Yahweh was worshipped by men outside the covenant, before Israel ever marched into the wilderness, before Sinai ever shook. It means the story we've been told is too small. It means God's love was never fenced in. His presence was never confined to bloodline, border, or building. From the very beginning, Yahweh has been the God of all people, not just the God of those inside the camp. He's the God who meets a priest in Midian, who speaks to a prophet in Mesopotamia, who receives worship from a man in Uz. He's the God who shows up where no one expects him, not because of where someone comes from, but because of what's in their heart. Before there were tribes, there were seekers. Before there was a law, there was a whisper. Before there was a nation, there was a call. Where are you? And scattered across the ancient world were people who heard it. They didn't have scrolls. They didn't have priests, but they had ears to hear. Job answered from the ashes. Jethro responded from the mountains. Melchizedek stood as a priest without pedigree. Balaam, flawed and torn, still trembled at Yahweh's voice. These were not Israel's prophets, but they were Yahweh's. Their stories tear down the walls of exclusivity and remind us God was never building a fortress. He was building a family, and that family has always included the ones we might overlook, so long as they dared to listen when Yahweh called. Maybe you've never fit the mold. You didn't grow up in pews. You didn't memorize scripture before bedtime. You weren't born into a spiritual bloodline. Maybe your story is stained with loss, with rebellion, with silence. Maybe you've walked through deserts no one saw, carried questions no one answered, and wondered, is there a place for someone like me in the story of God? Here's the truth that should shake you to your core. You've always been on Yahweh's mind. Before you ever whispered a prayer, He was already calling your name. Before you cracked open a Bible, He had written your soul into His plan. Before you even believed in Him, He believed in your redemption. You see, the God of Israel has never been just the God of Israel. He's the God of outsiders, the God of the wilderness dwellers, the altar builders, the truth seekers. The God of Melchizedek, who had no genealogy, the God of Job, who never knew the law, the God of Jethro, who worshipped right with no temple in sight, the God who spoke to a conflicted man like Balaam and still used him to prophesy a Messiah. And He's your God too. You carry something ancient in your soul, a divine hunger, a whisper from Eden, a fire that religion couldn't put out. And Yahweh, the same God who spoke stars into place, has been waiting on your yes. This isn't just history, it's your inheritance. You are not forgotten. You are not disqualified. You are not an accident on the edge of God's plan. You are part of a lineage older than religion and deeper than blood. You belong to Yahweh's global, eternal story, not because of where you came from, but because of where your heart is turning now. You carry the fire of those chosen by spirit, not blood. You stand in a divine line, from Enoch to eternity, proving that Yahweh writes greatness into those the world forgets, but heaven never does. This is the moment where every whisper becomes a shout, where the mystery unveils its face. The name Jesus, Yeshua in Hebrew, doesn't just mean God saves, it means Yahweh saves. The same Yahweh who walked with Enoch, the same Yahweh who answered Job from the whirlwind, the same Yahweh who received Melchizedek's worship and spoke to Balaam in the dark. That Yahweh put on flesh. Jesus is not a new God. He is Yahweh made visible, the eternal I Am wrapped in skin and mercy. He is the burning bush with eyes you can look into. He is the voice from eternity that now speaks your name with tenderness. He stepped out of divine mystery and into human history, not to create a new religion, but to call His people home. The outsiders, the wanderers, the ones the world called unworthy. He came for you, not because you're perfect, but because you were always His. Jesus is Yahweh with scars, Yahweh who bleeds, Yahweh who saves. And right now, the same God who walked with ancient prophets and desert priests is standing at the door of your soul, saying, I've always known you. Will you come with me? This isn't the end of the story. This is the invitation your spirit was made for. The worship of Yahweh didn't begin in a temple. It began in a garden, with breath in the lungs of humanity and a whisper from the heart of God. Long before there was a nation, there was a name. And that name has been carried through deserts, dreams, altars, and ashes, by those brave enough to listen when the world went silent, from Eden to Enoch, from Job's suffering to Jethro's praise, from Melchizedek's mystery to Balaam's broken obedience. That same name now rests on your tongue. You are not late, you are not less. You are part of the same eternal echo, a voice that still calls across generations. Where are you? And now heaven leans in. Creation holds its breath, because your story, yes, your story, is the next verse in this ancient song. Will you rise like Job and say, "My Redeemer lives"? Will you stand like Melchizedek, priest of a kingdom not made by hands? Will you step forward not because you were born into it, but because something holy inside you is finally waking up? This isn't just history. This is your inheritance. So open your mouth, call on his name. Let the fire in your chest answer the fire that first burned in Eden. Because the story isn't over. It's rising now, in you. If something in this message lit a fire in you, don't just sit with it. Hit like if this spoke to you in a way church never did. Tell me in the comments, what part caught you off guard? What truth are you still chewing on? And share this with someone who's been told they're too far gone. Let them know Yahweh's been calling their name long before they ever heard it. And if you're ready to answer that call, just whisper this: Yahweh, you were there before I saw you. You were calling me before I knew it. I hear you now, and I say yes. Thank you for being here. Really, if this resonated, subscribe and stay close. We're just getting started. Till next time, stay curious, stay bold, stay rooted,